I think we are live, so hi everybody and welcome to the office hours for OMS-CS 6300. As I think I mentioned online, I'm traveling, so I'm 6 hours ahead with respect to Atlanta time. So you're gonna have like a few office hours that are gonna be fairly late for me. So luckily, Erin and Will be here to kind of help correct my unavoidable mistakes. So I'm gonna
wake you up when you fall asleep.
Wake me up when I fall asleep. Normally, at least while I'm talking, I'm not gonna fall asleep, but I'm not cannot guarantee that that's not gonna happen in general. So let me just do the quick announcements on my side, so then I can let Erin and Will talk about the grading and say hi. So just as a quick reminder, we're on week number 5. So this week the topics are software architecture and software design, and we have 2 assignments, 2 things due. So one is the software design, which is assignment 5, and I guess kind of the main that's going to be the main topic of the office hours. And the second one is the don't forget the deliverable 0 for the group project, which is really a matter of a couple of minutes to complete, but remember to do it because that's how you provide your contact information for your team, so that you can kind of hit the ground running next week for the beginning of the group project. And that's all I have to say in terms of assignments. And so I'm going to let Erin and Will say hi and say their assignment.
Go ahead.
Their assignment.
Will?
Go ahead. You go first.
Oh,
I usually go
okay.
first.
So we're finishing up A3, and I guess that depends on how exhausted I am after the office hours. We'll have that merged in soon and get it out to you. And I'm sure we have tons of questions on A5 to get to, so it's good.
And that pretty much covers it, so I don't have a whole lot to add to that.
Okay, so then I guess we can start with the questions. And let me make sure that I have everything open correctly here. Okay, so let's start. So question number 1. And Erin, as usual, is going to help me here, since she's the main, she's kind of the assignment czar. So she's the one creating the core of the assignments. And so that's for the ones that directly related to the requirements, she's going to help me answer the question, so that I don't let's say contradict her vision. Okay, so first question. Is the group project going to be an implementation of the requirements described in assignment 5? If so, is there anything that we can be doing ahead of time to help us stay ahead? All right, so I guess it might or it might not. We always like to kind of think on our feet when it comes to the to the exact way in which we do the various assignments and deliverables. So we might be using this one, or we might not. And again, we're not trying to be mysterious, but it's just that there's really nothing you can do that will make a difference, whether it is or it is not. So just think about the assignment. Do this assignment, the design one, the best way you can. And if that's going to be part of the group project in any way, then if you've done it well, it will help. And if it's not part of it, you still have to do it well. So it really should not make a difference. And as I said, we're considering whether to do that or not, but we haven't made a final decision. So I guess non-committal answer. Is it possible to have a class which has an operation but no attributes? Yes, it is possible. And if yes, is the format, it's kind of unusual, but it's possible. And if yes, is this the format that you should use? Yes, that's one which has basically an empty box and just the operations. And by the way, I always mention this. I'm not really kind of a UML purist in any way. So to me, in the end, it's without kind of offending anybody, but it's boxes and errors. So basically, the boxes are the classes or the modules, and the errors are the relationships and the kind of the connections between the different parts of the system. So I'm not too picky about the syntax. So if you're not going to be penalized because you kind of use a slight variation, or because you use version 1.2 instead of version 2.0 UML. Just as an FYI. Does external web service directly connect to the classes in the system or through a database? No, it should actually connect directly to the classes in the system, in the sense that it's a set of utilities that your system will be using. And just there's a follow-up, which is more generally, additionally, please go over utility classes, when to use them, etc. So utility classes, I hate to say this is sort of a tautology, but basically you should use them every time you have a set of utilities that you want to put together. So imagine, for example, a set of methods that do some kind of general operations that are not maybe necessarily connected to your system, but that your system can benefit from and can leverage. So that's when you use a utility class. And normally, utility classes are made out of static members and methods, so it means that you don't need to instantiate them. But we can be flexible here. So the main thing is that we want you to think about external web services as sort of an external entity that you don't have to worry about. So it will be not in your diagram because you use it for the system to work correctly. But don't worry too much about it in terms of the kind of the low level details. I assume that its functionality is there, and your system will have to use it in order to operate correctly. So I don't know if Erin, you want to add something about this?
Yeah, that seems pretty good. We listed the functionality it provides. It should more or less be a black box that gives you those functions, and we don't want to see you having to design a whole client-server distributed thing. So you just have a black box for stuff to leave and come back.
Yeah. So and I guess this, you can see this as something that has been done to make the assignment more interesting, so that you can have a little bit of I think, Erin, you mentioned the fact that somebody was asking about the cloud services and so on. So this kind of goes in that direction. So hopefully it will make the design and the system more interesting to design. All right.
We've frequently had questions about, there being designs for a system that has to all be local, and it feels fake that it's all local and every user is really the same person, and what are you going to do with one device? And this is a way that it's not all local.
Okay, so now is there an equivalent to a UML class diagram for functional languages or for systems that don't have a class-based hierarchy? What about languages systems that don't have any object-orientedness at all? That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked, because in a sense, UML does not imply that you're going to implement the system in an object-oriented fashion. So one of the things, I'm kind of embarrassed to say how long ago it was, but I was teaching UML design really a number of years ago, probably more than 20 years ago. And I remember that one of the things that was interesting back then, object-oriented languages were not, maybe it was more than 20 years ago actually, were not as common as they are today. And people were implementing in C. And nevertheless, they were using UML to design. So in a sense, you could design any system using an object-oriented analysis and design approach. And then, of course, you'll have to make some extra steps when you need to implement it, to translate from the object-oriented design to whatever kind of language you have. With functional languages, might be a little harder just because of the very different nature of the language. But otherwise, nothing prevents you from using UML and, for example, implementing in languages that's nothing that is object-oriented. Of course, if you use an object-oriented language, there's a direct translation from the diagrams to the code that then makes it a little easier, a little more natural, but it's definitely not a requirement. Next question, will we be penalized for adding additional files to the repo? So I'm not sure which additional files you will add in this case, because basically you're supposed to provide a design and a description of the design. But if you have, like, I don't know, for example, extra parts of the design or whatever, it's perfectly fine with us. So as long as what we require is there, and as long as you don't commit gigabytes of useless data, which I don't think is what you have in mind, then it's fine to have some extra files.
I would say don't count on the TA to notice a file that they aren't expecting, especially if you haven't pointed it out. Like, if you're talking a picture or a diagram that you're referring to, we need to know where it is, or we're just expecting to see files where we've asked for them, and stuff goes by so fast you might not notice something else.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, in the sense that I was assuming we're reading the question that you're talking about extra files that are for your own benefit.
Maybe.
If you're submitting extra files that we are supposed to see, well, first of all, you shouldn't need to do that. But if you really need to do that, then you know, I guess it's even this, make sure to point them out. And again, in that case, it will be better if if you just provide what we request. But if it's for your own benefit, then no problem. So I guess good fact that good thing that Aaron saw it in this different way, so we cover all the different possibilities. Okay, when it comes to UML composition, does the class that depends on the parent class stand on its own? Using the figure below as an example, on implementation, the human class simply will have the ARM class as part of its attributes field. However, in the UML, to show the strong dependency, we do something like shown in the figure below. I hope if this is the case when trying to reference in the ARM class, will the human class attributes be available as well? Since the ARM class is the weak one, there should always be a corresponding parent class, or should we always refer to the human class when trying to get information from the ARM class? So I guess, try to summarize the question. In this case, in which you have a composition, which basically means that somehow the class on the right-hand side, which in this case is ARM, does not exist on its own, but exists as part of the previous one. From the implementation standpoint, it really depends. So you can, I guess, connect to the answer that I gave before, in which what you design is not necessarily what ends up being in the code one-to-one. So this is, imagine this is a sort of an analysis and design. If you think about also the lesson where I kind of play the skit with Spencer. So it's the first step towards building a system. So if you have something like this, this is a good way of representing the fact that human is composed. And again, it's just an example, so I'm using it as a sort of the guiding example for the explanation. So you have something that the human is made from an association of I guess arms. Another way to see this would be, for example, a car and the different parts of the car. And so designing it in this way makes it clear that one class is made up of all these other parts and makes it very explicit. Then nothing prevents you from implementing it by, for example, integrating, like in this case, the ARM into the human. So it really depends. But it's the main message when you represent something like this is to give a strong indication of something being composed of something else, or some class kind of together, kind of constituting or kind of becoming a collection of classes, and then you can implement it in different ways. So I hope this answers the question. But I guess the high level message is design is not necessarily what the implementation will become. And Erin, you were about to say something.
I think they might be asking kind of along the lines of the difference between a composition and an aggregation. And I think an example I've seen a lot is that a composition might be something like the human and ARM, where the lifespans are basically the same for the two objects. And the aggregation would be more like the car with the wheel, and like a wheel could be put on a different car or something, or exist on its own. And if they're trying to represent it more particularly, that might be something for them to look into, is the composition and aggregation, which is like the full filled in diamond or the empty diamond.
Okay, so if that's the question, then let me go back to an earlier comment, which is I don't want to be quoted on this one, but I'm on record, so I guess I can be quoted. But it's, again, don't worry too much about this kind of details, in the sense that UML is not a formal language, formal design language, so it's sort of a kind of a rigorous way of providing a design, of expressing a design, but it's really there's no formal semantics, or there's no kind of formal meaning. So a lot of this is sort of, how to say, it's not crisply defined, it's kind of fuzzy. So don't worry too much about the differences between composition or aggregation. So in a sense, as I said before, in the end, it's boxes that show classes and arrows, or lines that show dependencies between them. Use this notation to make things explicit when you think it's important to make them explicit, but don't kind of stress too much over them, because it's nothing too formal. So in the end, it's just an indication. So I don't want to downplay too much the role of the semantics, but of the syntax of UML. But some things are really arguable one way or the other. And I see several examples in which people talk about aggregation or versus composition, and you can actually it's kind of a continuous line. So I guess following up on what Aaron said, my answer would be also to don't worry too much about it. And it boils down to a matter of interpretation in some cases, and a kind of subjective interpretation. Then there was a question about the plus and minus modifiers, and then that was answered by Christopher correctly, so I'm not going to get there. And I know, Erin, were you about to say something else, or?
Oh, no, I agreed that it was probably more detailed than we needed. It just was if that was what he was trying to figure out for his own extra detail. And
I have to say, every time I read a UML, either textbook or document, and trying to describe this detail, I always find it somehow kind of very subjective the way we interpret some difference. So for sure we won't penalize you for that. If it's for your own culture, you feel free to look at one of those many sources to look at the subtleties between the different connectors, but don't worry about it if it's just for the assignment. We are not that picky. Okay. Oh, and I think actually, I'm sorry, going back to one of the earlier questions, I just noticed that Annie was mentioning something to me in chat. So just, I didn't mention that because I thought it was obvious, but maybe it's good to point it out for the question about the utility class. We basically told you that the external web service should be modeled as a utility class. So do that, since it's explicit in the assignment. I probably don't need to say, but just in case. Okay, now there's a question in 4 parts about the requirements. So I think this might be one in which Erin will have to jump in, so that, as I said, I don't contradict her view on some of the subtleties of the requirements. Let's start. Requirement number 4. What does an underlying database mean? Do we need to set it up as a class with attributes, or we can design it like external web service, which is a utility class to connect to the database and transmit information to it? So I guess I'm going to take this one, and then Erin, jump in if I say something that is different from what you had in mind. But basically, what we were thinking about with the database is just that you need to have some persistency on the application. So there's going to be a database, and I think we say that explicitly in the assignment. Let me make sure that, since Erin and I normally go back and forth, but we say explicitly that a database might be omitted if it's only persistent information. So if you're just using to persist information, don't worry about it. And if it's more prevalent, then you will have to model it. So personally, I will probably put there some sort of a database external class. But Erin, as I said, you have the final word on this. It's your baby, so I'll let you.
I mean, usually we don't look for the extra layers. So if you're just, you know, some sort of ORM is taking what's in your data-oriented classes and stuffing it in the database, we don't really need to see just a framework layer. But I think what we were trying to avoid is people taking the database class and following Will over here because they like him so much, and then going, I don't need to model any of my business logic because everything will auto-magically happen in the database, and give us a chart with nothing. So don't do that. If all of your business logic is there, like, you know, we need to see stuff actually happening.
And I think actually, because that's a problem we have often with the design assignment. So it's good that Erin mentioned that. It's be careful because in some cases, you know, people tend to kind of imply a lot, like saying, "Oh, you mentioned any of this? We don't have any method for any of this because it all happens in this class." So not only for the database. So try to be, you know, it's fine to be a high level, but not too high level. Like you put a class, because in the extreme cases, you put a class there with a main, and then just say, "Oh, everything happens in the main," right? So of course, it's a possible solution, but that, you know, it's arguably a bad design. So try to make explicit what you're trying to model. And the way I do it personally, which works well for me, is after I've done my design, I sort of try to navigate some scenarios of usage, and I want to make sure that basically the information is available so that the classes are structured and the relationships are there such that I can actually access what I need to access and so on. So that's one way to do it. So basically, make too many things implicit and try to use the additional document to, if there's something implicit, to describe that and make it so that we can clearly understand how the design will work. But you know, I guess we just had a TA meeting right before this. Grading the design assignment is always like kind of the most painful part. I will say. I mean, I guess, you know, Erin and Will can confirm of all the assignments that we have in this class, just because there's so much subjectivity that makes it difficult to come up, and it's also kind of the most time-consuming to come up with a kind of general way of grading on a rubric. So we have to kind of look at every case in a sense, in you know, kind of one by one way. Okay, so do we need to specify getters and setters for attributes on the UML, or we can assume all attributes are getters and setters? No, it's fine. You don't need to specify them. Do we need to specify types for attributes, return types, and argument types for methods? So the general rule for these kind of details is if you think it's important to understand the design, put it there. If not, it's fine if you don't have it. So I know it's kind of, you know, it's sort of a non-answer, but it will make sense, you know, as you get more into the design. So some cases it really doesn't matter what the type is, or it's kind of obvious. In some other cases, it helps you understand the design. So when in doubt, you can put it there, but you don't always have to do it. Can we assume that username is unique globally, or is it unique locally on the phone? It is unique locally on the phone. Do we assume that the server knows how to figure out who's who in the player ratings? So I would say that it's unique globally, but, you know, Erin, I'll let you take this one.
You can assume globally, but I would say don't really worry about the server part beyond what we actually specified you need to exchange. Just those, I think there's 4 things that we said need to go to or from that web service. Don't worry about the server past that.
Okay. Sorry, I was scanning through the question. I just saw that we had like a 3-page question that came in. So let's see when we get to that one. Okay, next question. Should we add constructors to the class diagram? No. Will we be penalized if we don't include visibility? I don't recall Professor Alex including in the diagram shown in the lectures. No, you don't have to include visibility at this level of detail. It seems like I could interchangeably use an association and an operation because they both indicate some actions performed. do I understand this correctly? So what should I choose to use, one or the other? So an association and operation are not necessarily the same thing, but there are cases in which an association might then become an operation during implementation. But you know, I guess it's kind of tough. You know, Erin, if you have a good example in mind, please feel free to jump in.
Well, I think the way some of the examples were drawn up and condensed later in the lecture, he's talking about like where one class would call an operation another class, and then you name the association something similar to that. But that's really talking about the relationship between the two. It doesn't really replace the operation itself unless you know, unless it's just so cursory, it's like calling a getter or a setter or something that doesn't need to be shown. But you might have like class A creates class B, and then you called the association creates. It doesn't mean there's no function there. So
I guess, you know, that's a good way to put it. So to put it in a different way. So in one case, if you think about an operation is telling you a capability of a class in itself. And an association is telling you how two classes are related to one another. And it could be that the association implies the fact that you're going to call a specific operation in that class, but they really give you different kind of information. So I definitely wouldn't say that you can interchangeably kind of put one there or the other. And in a sense, for example, if you could have an association that, you know, it says registers in the case of a student for a course, and then if in the course you don't have any kind of operation that allows that, there might be sort of an inconsistency in the diagram. So I guess, Donald, if you have a specific example in mind of a case in which you can model one thing in one way or another, feel free to follow up. But otherwise, I would say, generally speaking, they really express different things, which are not fully orthogonal, but they are different kind of aspects of the design. For requirement number 9, okay, let me go to number 9 so that I know exactly what we're talking about. To add a new cryptogram association with enter solution phrase, enter matching
cryptogram.
And it does it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's meant by edit and angle involved information, referring to information number 9 only? Yes, I would say it's only the one in point item 9. You confirm, Mary?
Yeah, it's basically just don't get them stuck where they make a cryptogram with a typo in it and they can't fix it. You know, it's just part of those same steps that are listed there.
Okay, and does any prior solution really refer to any prior solution? Simply the current player's prior solution is just the current player's prior solution. You can imagine there's many of these, like, you know, I don't know, I personally like to play the New York Times crossword puzzle, and even though I'm not that good at it, but and sometimes, you know, you can do it a little bit, and then you take it up again, and then you take it up again. So every time you go there, you have a partial solution, and if you complete one, then you'll have the complete solution. So I guess that's what's there. And again, as for the previous one, Erin, feel free to say that I'm wrong.
Nope, that's fine. And like I said before, nothing is like worldwide, server-wide, unless we really specifically pointed it out for that. Just don't worry too much about the server picture for anything else.
Okay, for requirement number 11, as a follow-up to the previous question, can we assume the list only show the current class number of incorrect solution submissions? I will say yes, without checking. Fine with that person. Yes. So that's only for the current player. Mm-hmm. All players should be able to see the list of player ratings. Should administrator be able to see the list of player ratings? Erin, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah. Well, the list of player ratings is the list of all the players' ratings. So there's, yeah, all players would be able to see it It should pretty much show the same list for all of them. And we didn't make it a requirement that the administrator be able to see the list. You know, you could figure that they could see it, but there's no real reason for that. They could always, you know, have a player account themselves if they wanted to.
Okay, next question. How should we handle the case whether the list, either player ratings or cryptograms are empty? Is this an assumption left for us to decide? Yeah, I guess you can decide how to handle it exactly, but it should be, I mean, I can see a fairly straightforward way of doing that, and I don't think there's too many variations. You probably, if there's nothing to show, you will just say that there's nothing to show. I read that you can use properties to convey the same information as an association class. Since Professor Alex only showed the association class, does that mean that the preference to use association class over properties? No, it doesn't mean that. So we wanted to show an example of an association class, but it's don't take that as any kind of indication that we prefer one thing over the other. It's just whatever you think is the best way of expressing your design will be fine. The user interface shall be intuitive and responsive. These requirements sound really vague to me, and seems like it doesn't have a place in the UML class diagram, does it? And so I think we said explicitly in the assignment that that's one of the things that should not be modeled in the design. And I can double check, but that's I think
it's the actual example you gave of how to write this out.
Right. So yes, it's on purpose vague, and you don't need to model it. Is it possible to talk about how this assignment will be graded? Understand the UML and design information document, but anything that actually will be used to validate what is model described really meets your expectations are being assessed on the approach. Is there a design that we aim to be like? How much subjectivity versus objectivity is what I'm trying to gauge, as well as how well we use UML. And then there's a follow-up. Listening to the above questions seems to indicate there is some sensible flexibility in the model, so long as we can explain things that we don't make egregious designs. For example, in Outrush in DB, that's in the DB utility class hidden is not in the office hours. So yeah, I think you ask a very good question, and in fact I touched upon that in terms of when I said it. Unfortunately, I don't know. Design is kind of an art more than a science, and so there's a lot of subjectivity involved, and there's many good solutions as well as many obviously bad solutions. So what we're going to try to do is making sure that your design is really realizing the requirements, and that's pretty much it. So don't worry too much about a perfect use of UML or having the perfect design, because that there's many good ones that you can have. So what we're going to try to do in terms of grading is I guess it's similar to what I was mentioning before in terms of verifying or kind of validating your own design. We have a set of scenarios. We try to follow those and make sure that they're realizable in the design that you provide. And then there's a lot of basically manual work in which we read the design, we read your document, and we try to figure out how the system will work and grade accordingly. And so, and if there is disagreement, because for example, you design something that you think will work great, and we don't agree, there's room for discussion for that. So hopefully we won't have 200 and some great challenges, but there is, if we misunderstood something, don't worry about it, because we're happy to go back and revisit it. So that's the way the grading for this one works. So that's one for which is really tough to provide a rubric.
I would say,
okay, now yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Add with that we're trying really hard not to push them toward whatever design is in our heads. And some people might ask questions where they think there's one right answer or there's not. And you're going to get a lot of answers where I go, I can't tell you that that's best or not. It may or may not be what I would do, but that's not the point.
Okay, so now we are at this very long kind of daunting question. So let's see what we can do here. If we don't get to answer everything, also some of the questions are fairly elaborated, so we don't want to probably stay, spend the next 20 minutes on this one. So let's see what we can do, and otherwise we'll start to answer offline right after the office hours. So how many classes on average do we expect in a well thought out solution? Less than 5, between 5 and 10, or greater than 10. I guess this goes exactly like what Erin was saying. It really depends, so we don't want to give you a number, because then you'll be trying to fit that number, and maybe your solution is fantastic, much better than ours, and uses a different number of classes. So there's no target in terms of number of classes, so just design as you think it's best, and use the number of classes that you need. I guess something I can do, if you end up with 100 classes, it's probably not good, because you won't need that many, so don't overdo it. And so I will say that you're not going to have that many classes. We don't expect to see that many classes on the design.
You should probably have more than one on the low end too.
Exactly. More than one. If you have more than one and less than 100, it's we're in business. If you're at the other end, then it's probably there's an issue. If method of class C uses local variable of class D and forward, so I guess local variable, you mean an attribute of class D. So if method of class C uses an attribute of class D and forwards the reference as argument to another method of a different class E, then the following relation depends. Okay, so let me stop you right there, because I think you're thinking about the code and how to design that code. And that's sort of the wrong way to think about this. So this should come afterwards. This is a very kind of low-level detail. So here, don't worry about this details, and don't go bottom up. It should really be a top-down kind of operation. So think about what kind of relationship there are between the classes, and then when you get to the implementation, you'll figure out where things go. But it seems to me that, and I might be wrong, but it seems to me that kind of you're looking at this the wrong way, trying to kind of reverse engineer what you have in mind for the code, for the design, and that's not the way it should work. So the design is really a hierarchical operation in which you can read the requirements at a very high level, do a high-level design, and do a low-level design, then implement. And so you shouldn't be worrying about these low-level details for at this point. I guess a similar thing for question 3. And let's see, question 4. Any rule of thumb to quickly tell if relationship between two classes is a dependency, association, or aggregation? Yeah, I guess you could, and I think I was trying to see whether I have it in the, I think it's there in the notes that I did, and in the lectures. So let me very quickly look at that just to make sure I don't mention something that is incorrect. But okay, second here. But I think we have a very clear explanation, a concise explanation. Yeah, so basically, it is when we talk about relationships. So for the dependencies, you can think about every time you have X that uses Y, for example, because there's a Y as a parameter of a method call, that's a typical example. And so every time a class uses another class in some fashion, then you have a dependency, which is kind of a very general relationship. Then if a class contains another class, for example, it has it as a field, then if you can say X has a Y, then you will use an association. That can also be an aggregation. And then you have a generalization that's an easy one of another higher level class. So it should be kind of fairly straightforward. And when the things are so close that you cannot decide, normally it also means it really doesn't matter. So as I said, I wouldn't worry too much about that. In the end, what we care to see is the fact that you have the right relationships, in the sense that classes that are in relationship with one another have a connection between the two, and we're not going to be too picky about these kind of details. Is there one or multiple admins per app? I will say one. Can a user have a dual admin and play a role? Well, I guess you could. You log in in different ways, or you kind of you'll start the application in different ways. So Erin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you need to necessarily even designate they're the same person. They certainly could do both, but there's very little that overlaps. An admin doesn't solve puzzles or have stats, so it's not really entirely relevant.
Right. I guess you can see that, somebody being an employee in a bank and also being a customer of that bank. But it's the same person, but playing two very different roles, and the fact that it's the same person is kind of inconsequential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they probably wouldn't be able to use the same login for both.
Right. Can users migrate roles between admin and player? Again, there's no real migration, but you could, the same person, sure, could do both. What happens if a user leaves? Is their account deleted or deactivated? I guess we don't have any concept of leaving, really, so I would not worry about that. What if the user leaves and then returns? Do we start off with a new account or simply reactivate all the time? So I don't think anywhere in the requirements we mention, again, this option of leaving or deactivating or activating, so I will not worry about it. So, and that's actually a general recommendation. We try to keep things simple, so don't make your life harder when there's no need to. So if we don't mention some specific feature, then don't put it. I mean, so feel free to put it there if you think it can improve the system, but it's at your own risk, because you're kind of making more work for yourself, and also you might be complicating the picture and making it more harder to come up with a good design. Then do players see all solved cryptograms from all the players, past and present, only the ones that they have solved? Only the ones they have solved. So also it's just, every player sees their own history. Do players view current players' ratings or history of ratings from every player ever registered in case players are allowed to live with a footprint?
That's, again, the leaving that we said they didn't.
I guess it's the leaving, right, yeah. Does player, so basically there's no such thing as leaving. Does player get to reset and then solve one of previously solved cryptograms, or only pick from unsolved cryptograms to solve? I think once you have a partial solution, it comes up, but I might be recalling correctly. So Erin, I'll let you take this one.
We had them viewing the solved ones just like the partially solved ones and others, so that they can see their solution. I don't see any reason why they couldn't change stuff, but it doesn't seem very productive in these sort of puzzles. Once you know the answer, the answer doesn't change. So you could make a reset button, but we didn't ask for one. Again, that seems like kind of an extra feature.
Is the cryptograms list sorted in any order, such as by unique cryptogram ID? At this point, you shouldn't be worried about this. It's not going to change your design, and also if it's not mentioned, that means that it's not relevant. Do admins also get to modify or entirely delete cryptograms and/or player entries in the system? In which case, do their unique IDs, usernames get recycled? Again, I don't think we have these requirements in there, right, Erin?
No, there was no requirement for that in there. I was really trying not to make there be 500 web service functions, which you would need if you were going to start modifying and deleting and everything else.
Example of a use case where we should not need the database to persist information present in the design. So I think you need persistency. So, I mean, I can think about use cases that don't involve a database because they don't get to that part, but I think the database will have to be there. Example of in this case when we need database to persist information not present in the design. Well, I'm not sure if it's not in the design. I mean, sure, I can think about implementation details that won't be in the design and might need to be persisted, but again, I wouldn't worry about that at this. So it seems to me in general that you might be overthinking a little bit the problem, and you might be thinking already too much about implementation. So try to not get there and just stay at the design, kind of high-level design level. The app is underlying database, so does the server. So does the server. The interaction with these databases need to be shown in the class diagram. So I think, and I'll let Erin give you the final word on this, but It really depends. So you can, as Erin said, that the main point here is that we don't want the database to kind of hide too much hidden functionality. So there should be a database there, you're probably using it. It could be sort of non-visible because it's just a persistency route in which you save the information, or it could be something that you show explicitly. And
he's asking about the server database too, and I would treat the server like a black box. Like you have a web service API. You will call that, and the rest of the server is out of scope.
So I guess, yeah, because it seems like the interaction with this database. So I guess you're mentioning both databases. So yeah, for the part about the web server, that's a black box for you. I totally agree. For the part about the database for the application, then again, feel free to kind of put there something showing that there's an external database if you want to, and that there's some interaction with that, or feel free to put in your description document the fact that you're assuming that there is an underlying database, and it will be used to make some of the information persistent. Do we need separate classes for applications since there are multiple instances of it in the real world?
It wouldn't.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I guess you're saying whether there is an application class, because this will be instantiated, but that's not really. So in a sense, if you have multiple instances, the multiple instances will not be instances of a class. So there will be just multiple installations. So you might have, you might want to have an application class for other reasons, but not because there's multiple installations. And again, Erin, feel free to jump in if you want to add something.
Right.
Okay, do we need to model and elaborate the interaction between the external web service and the central server, including method of the service invokes on the server? So again, external server service provides some services and some utilities that your system will use. So we want to see these interactions and whether they come from the central server, from the which again, I'm not sure what the central server. I guess the central server would be the central server associated with the external web services. So again, external web service is a black box, so don't worry about that. Just show what services your application is using on this black box. Don't worry about modeling the external world. Will we be writing the server-side code too for the app? Don't worry about what you'll be writing. You're writing a design, and that's what you should be concerned with. Is it local player rating updated immediately by the app upon submitting correct solution? Is it sent to the server right away? And again, I'm sorry to keep repeating the same thing, but it also seems to me that this is an implementation detail, and it shouldn't affect your design.
Well, I don't know. He might be a little concerned about like what class should be calling that function or something. I could see that being a little bit pertinent. But we didn't really specify a time on that. I would, except that we said that the player could exit at any time. So I would consider that in where you put that operation.
Okay, so I guess in that case it might, but so the concept, I guess the concept of immediately though sounds like this is just to make sure that the design is a static view of the system, so it should enable the interaction that you need to have, but there's really no concept of timing, just to make sure. Which of admin or player gets to send updated player ratings to the server? So I guess that will happen while the player is playing, and so it's I mean, it's not really admin or player, but it's really the application that sends that. And it seems to me it will be the application while being used by the player. Does admin also need to request additional cryptograms from the server? One use case will be to ensure that the new cryptogram isn't a duplicate in the server. Or one can potentially register a cryptogram with a new unique ID, but might be a duplicate. I guess, again, don't worry about that. So it could be that somebody might come up with exactly the same cryptogram that someone else created, and I think that's fine. And you could add that functionality as a plus, but we don't mention anything about this kind of checks. is cryptogram identifier purely numeric or string? I was thinking about numeric when I looked at that, but Erin, do you have a preference?
Not really. I was trying not to like give them specific data types on everything in there, so you can assume the identifier is whatever makes sense to you. And so long as it's consistent in your diagram, that should be fine.
If an object calls a static method of another utility consists this relation and association or dependencies, I would say that this is probably dependency because you're really using the services of another class. Let's see how we're doing in terms of this question. I guess we passed the halfway. Let's keep going. How does admin generate a unique player username and verify there's not a duplicate of one in the system? Or does admin need to access the list of players in the system to check against? Alternatively, the admin can simply request a unique player username from the server as opposed to generating locally.
I believe it says that when the admin creates a player, they will enter a unique username. So however they want to figure that it's unique. But that's admin entered data.
And you can imagine this going to a central server that will tell you this name already exists, and they'll have to go back and provide another one. Does admin need to be able to edit existing player info, in which case a list of players in the system might need to be accessed? I'll have to check the requirements there, and if you remember off the top of your head. So
actually, that was one of the earlier questions in the office hours, asked if it applied to 8 or 9 or just 9, and we said no, you only need to edit the cryptogram info.
Okay, shouldn't admin be able to save new player info once it is entered, just like new cryptogram info is entered? And I thought that the administrator will actually save this information. So I guess it's implicit, but requirement 8 implies that the administrator will be saving this information. And sorry, I'm trying to see what it's mentioning. What else? So Erin, I don't know if you want to add something here.
Right. I mean, the only reason it doesn't say de-save is mostly because it didn't seem to need an edit and review to the extent that the cryptogram did. I was just the cryptogram seemed to have more validation going on, that the solution and the initial puzzle need to match in some ways. So yeah, they should be saving what they enter.
You can imagine once this information is entered, it's actually entered, and so it gets saved. How does the admin account get set up, including username and password? I don't think we mentioned username and password.
No, we said authentication was
operation, right?
Let's see. We said authentication is optional. Like, if they just want to go, I'm admin, that's fine. I wouldn't do that in a real system, but
yeah, let's say that at this level, basically, that's something that, we don't want you to worry about. So right now, imagine there's this app has 2 modes of operation. One is the admin mode, and the other one is the player mode. And your design should reflect that, basically. And if you want to start thinking about authentication, then feel free to provide their, classes or methods that will allow you to do that, but it's optional. Is admin able to delete player or cryptogram records from the server? I don't think we mentioned that, so let's say no for now. Is the confirmation message from external web service containing the unique cryptogram ID in the form of a toaster or setting up of a text widget on the screen? Again, this is way beyond what you should be worried about right now in terms of the design. So that there's
be assuming that this is an Android app.
Exactly, because it might not even be an ad. Plus, we're talking about communication with the server, so the toast is really a communication to the user. So it's even if you have to worry about the implementation details, I think that might not be relevant. And second, really don't worry about that for now. Once solution is submitted, does the user get notified for both correct and incorrect submission, or only for correct submission? Well, I would imagine again that the user will be notify whether the submission is correct or not. And yeah, so that's, but again, that seems to be more of a kind of a procedural kind of aspect. So the concept of correct or incorrect submission should be there, but right now, I don't think that the design will probably reflect that. I mean, unless you have a specific method that does the operation.
I mean, I guess we mentioned that there's a screen that should, well, I think we mentioned it should tell them that the solution is right, but yeah, the player shall get a result indicating whether the solution was correct, which to me says both correct and not correct, but even if it didn't say that, I'd hope it wouldn't just hang.
Okay, is development deviation in the form of a toast message or an update? Again, don't worry about that for now. You're not implementing the system. Is player able to access a previously solved cryptogram or resolve it, or only unsolved cryptograms? Yeah, I think we explicitly mentioned that, so you should be able to access any existing cryptogram. So if you already solved it, you'll get your previous solution. Okay, to have player rating as a separate class contained inside player class. For that, it's really your call how you decide to design it. So we're not gonna tell you, kind of give you design guidelines for this. It depends on how you design the rest of your system to some extent. List of player ratings is sorted by number of cryptograms solved. How do ties get resolved? Should we sort by unique player username in case of tie? Again, that's not going to affect your design. It's only going to affect your implementation, and you might never implement this. So don't worry about it for now. And otherwise, you can, if you were to have to implement that, you can make your own assumption and just be consistent with those. UML editor not allowing underlining of static methods or adding adornments such as directional triangles. If that is okay, yeah, sure, that's fine. Any advantages for using independent container classes for the various lists used in the design? So again, I'm not sure you have to get to the level of using container classes here. So again, you might be thinking about, too low level design. So you probably won't need to specify that. If the solution is achieved in multiple tries, should the player be able to access snapshots of previous or partial submissions? Yes, we have that in the requirement that you can bring up partial solutions.
Well, I think he's saying after it's solved, can you see like your past wrong answers, which seems to be a little extra. It does say you need to track how many wrong answers you have. I don't think you'd be able to like undo all the way back. That'd be storing an awful lot.
But I guess partial submissions though, so those will be the partially solved cryptograms.
Right.
So those you should be able to bring up, and previous submissions. Let me see. I'm not do.
Oh, I think the question is saying if they, on one specific cryptogram, they tried to solve it and it was wrong or part done, and then later they solved it, can they go back and see the half wrong one? Which, that seems like you'd have to keep everything the player ever entered to show those snapshots, which is a bit excessive. Like if you have something that's partial and it's still partial, you should be able to see it. But we don't have any requirements that they have every move they ever made on the cryptogram.
Yeah, and the way I saw this is actually the fact that you have, for each cryptogram, you have a current state of your solution. So either you submit, so to me, there's no previous, so there's no history basically. So it's like for player X and cryptogram Y, there's a solution which is either, the state is like, you never did that, so it's completely, you're starting from scratch, or you have a partial solution. In this case, you bring up the solution, or you have a solution whether it's correct or wrong. And when you bring it up, you'll see that solution. So in a sense, that's what the requirements describe. And so there's no such thing as you submit 10 times and there's a history of these submissions, which I think is the same thing that Erin is saying. So you're just bringing up whatever is the status for that player and that cryptogram. Is it expected to make use of association classes to solve this assignment? No, it is not. So you can solve it without association class. And let me just, this is just refresh to make sure I don't miss anything. So I think we have the last question. So we're done with this one. Should cardinality be shown on an association which also has a class? Yes, you can show cardinality if it's useful. And I like to see, and cardinality is one of the things that I like to see because in many cases helps understanding design, and you can use that. You can do that with an association class. And again, I just want to say once more, since the association class came up a few times, the fact that we have it in our example. So don't take the library example as something you have to emulate in its kind of form for this assignment. So you can solve assignment 5 in a completely different way, and that's just a way of showing the process of coming up with the high-level design. It's not meant to be a template that you'll use to solve the assignment. So don't try to fit basically your solution into that framework. You can have a completely different solution with no association classes with no date, or if I recall correctly, the classes that are there, or money, and that's perfectly fine. So don't take that as, oh, you should try to kind of tweak that design to solve this one. That's not the goal. That's not the purpose. These are very different systems, and so it's fine if they're modeled in a very different way. And I think I saw another question coming up, and then I think we'll beyond the hour, so we'll probably have to wrap it up.
I don't see another one. There's just a piece of feedback on the giant one.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, yeah, there it is. It is a snapshot of partials once the cryptography is fully solved. Thanks for the clarification. Okay. All right. So it seems like, again, we're beyond the hour. So I'm actually glad that we got all these questions. It's always so we have the office hours for a reason. So we're always happy when when there's stuff to discuss, and we know the design assignment is one that generates many questions. And with this, I guess we're gonna conclude the office hours. As usual, we're gonna answer your questions on Piazza, the additional questions you may have, and we're gonna have again less. As I said, with the fact that then traveling is always difficult to plan too much in advance, but we should have the office hours again in a week at the same time. So bye everybody. See you next week. And as usual, I'm gonna let Will and Erin say bye. And maybe Will, you can also show your T-shirt in its full glory. I think if we missed the message.
Sure. Well, so here's the. It's not switching. I don't know why it's not switching to me. But
I see you.
Anyway, there's the T-shirt.
Shut up.
Yeah, and I will be curiously non-active on Piazza for the next few days because tomorrow morning I get on a plane and I will be in Berlin until Sunday. So aim all of your questions and such at Erin, because if you aim it at me, you'll hear back sometime on Monday.
Well, I was going to go to Awesome Con this weekend, so their Saturday might be a little bit interesting. But I'll be around during the week at least. And
okay, so everyone search for TA Travis. He can help you.
Yeah,
everything to Travis this Saturday.
So somebody will be there, so don't worry about it. All right, bye everybody. Take care.
See you on Piazza.
So long, everyone.